On October 30th, I usually hear from my son, Jacob, throughout the day at some point. He was one who would just check in with me, or typically before it was dinner time, he would call and say, "Hey, Mom, what's for dinner?" And he used to do that all through high school, and then he soon realized that Mom didn't like that question, "What's for dinner?" when I was working. So he finally would start in with, "Mom, what can I start for you?" Because he knew that that was something that would start to bother me on the way home. So I didn't hear from Jake that day, and it was such a busy day at work, it didn't dawn on me that I didn't hear from him until I started driving home. And then I got this sick sense in my stomach because I hadn't heard from him. So on my way home, I called my older son and asked him if he'd heard from his brother. And he said no when he got home from work. At that time, he was working with my husband, and they both got home from work. They just assumed Jacob was sleeping because his door was shut. So they just said, I assumed Jake was taking a nap. He didn't work that day, so he was resting. And so I just went to the gym, and I asked, had your dad seen Jake? And he said, no, we both came home. We were just assumed he was sleeping. My husband went to baseball practice. So then I got really more upset on my way home, just calling him, no one's answering. So by that point, I've really worked myself up, just knew something was wrong, and I walked in the door, and our dog came running to me, I could tell, in a very anxious way, and went running up the stairs. So I dropped all my stuff and ran up the stairs and opened the door, and I found Jacob on his bed, and he was blue. So I ran to him, and he was cold, and I just, I knew it. It was any parent's nightmare just came true. And then what you would assume, calling 911, going to the neighbors, trying to get help, to help see if there's anything I could do. And happened to be one of our neighbors is a retired sergeant in the police department, and he came running over and went in and said that Jacob had passed. And from that point on, it's just, it was a nightmare, just the worst day of my life. Initially, my thought was he's in his room. He had the video control by his bed, and I thought to myself, what had happened? I thought, did he take his life? What happened that he's right here? I didn't, as a mom, I'm sick, I'm screaming, I'm crying, and so I'm not scanning the bedroom. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing. As soon as our neighbor said, no, he is passed, and the police came, I didn't go back into that room until it was time to say goodbye. So I was just devastated. So initially what happened is when the police came, they were starting to assume that Jake had taken his life. And which as a mother, you're like, what happened? He was fine just the night before. That could not have been. That's not him, right? It couldn't have been. And it wasn't until my nephew came in, who is a physician, and he went into the bedroom to see Jake, and he's the one who said, "No, this is not suicide. I don't see anything." He's the one who said, "This is something else. This is something else." So that's when they were then, investigating the room to see, and they found 2 other pills on his bedside. And now, knowing what we know now, they're the typical blue pills that you see, that's typically laced with fentanyl. And they soon found out, after they did the autopsy, that my nephew was correct. It was due to fentanyl. He's an ER physician. He just He just saw how big Jake was. There was nothing else to show that that was the case, and how he appeared. And so that's what it was. The next day, I remember bits and pieces. So it's from my son. My oldest son received a text from one of Jacob's good friends who said, this is, he got it off of social media, he got it off of social media, asking for what he was looking at for something to sleep, a Xanax or something. Jake suffered from depression and anxiety, and my husband can share more about, some of the ups and downs that he went through, but he was doing well at the time, but he struggled with that, and he took a step backwards looking for something and did it on social media. So the next day,
the person who gave him the pill, he didn't know. He never met that person.
So it was one of his friends who texted my son, older son, to say, this is where Jacob got that from. And what was really upsetting about that is shortly thereafter, my son got another text from the same one of Jacob's friends who said that he's still selling the same pills. As a matter of fact, shortly thereafter, we saw, I don't know if it was Instagram or what it was, but it was a gallon bag just filled with those blue pills that, although he knew Jacob had passed, he was continuing to sell that.
Jake wouldn't want this for any other family, and Jake would feel, do the best you can, and whether you use my name or not, but you have to tell my story. This was a mistake, and this was not a suicide attempt, and this was someone who, in a bad moment, reached out to somebody he didn't know through social media and grabbed a pill that had basically a few specks of fentanyl on it and took his life within seconds. A person as big as Jake couldn't survive that pill. There's no way an average person could survive that pill. Jake was a great kid. I mean, life came easy for Jake. Jake was a great athlete. He was very funny. He was the center of attention. Every kid wanted to be with Jake at all times. He was the one who made the world go round. And so whether it was playing baseball, whether it was just hanging out, he made everybody laugh. And he loved baseball more than anything, and he became, in love with football later on. But baseball was everything to him, and it was important for him to play. He felt the sense of community. He was funny, but he had a big voice and a big personality. I would compare him to kind of like Chris Farley, as far as just his sense of humor, that everybody laughed and wanted to be around him. And he took baseball seriously because his older brother played. I coached them. We started a group of kids in the neighborhood to play baseball, and they went on to have a tremendous amount of success. Most of them became professional baseball players, and Jake would have been extremely happy to see where those guys are now, because he knew those kids coming out of high school and knew there was talent, and we were very good. And now one of his closest friends plays third base for the San Francisco Giants, and there are more kids along the way that there was that connection of, this was us, this was our group. And Jake was a big family guy, and so he, if you met Jake, he'd give you a big hug, and nobody hugged like Jake. He was a big guy. Jake was 6'3", he was about 280, and strong as can be, but man, he had a huge heart. And man, once he brought you into his circle, man, he'd defend you, and he loved you, and he was great. But when he hit a sense of depression around his freshman year of high school, he had trouble getting out of it. And a lot of it had to do, I would say, with social media. He used to say to me all the time, everybody's living a better life than me, Dad. And he would look at, Instagram, for example, and I would try and explain to him, these are just people's highlights. Nobody's living a better life than you. Everybody has their ups and downs, and trying to explain the roller coaster of life. And so the sad part is, when you're down here, you don't know when you're going to go back up. But you enjoy the ride and know when you're going to go back up. And he, at the end of his senior year, when he graduated, he made a video that went viral on him just talking into his phone in his room about what he went through with depression and how you aren't alone. And I had no idea he made this video, but it took off. And it took off to the point he was asked to speak in front of thousands of people at suicide prevention walks. And he was doing good things. And in the end, he realized his athletic career was over, but he wanted to give back and he wanted to help kids get scholarships. And so we started coaching baseball, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. And those kids have gone on to turn scholarships and hopefully will be turned pros as well. And when he passed, so many of these kids that that Jake touched, will still say, Jake was my best friend. And it's the age difference is surprising that they still say that, or they take his number, his jersey number 25 when they can, or write his initials in the batter's box. But there are so many people who have honored him, and he was loved. And the interesting thing is, Jake had a big heart. At the time, he felt, I think, alone a lot when he was going through his worst time. And him and I would talk a ton, and he would say to me, if I passed, nobody would even care if I was ever here. And I would say, that's not the case. He says, nobody outside of you and mom and my brother would show up to my funeral. Well, when Jake passed, it was an amazing outpour of people that showed up. It was standing room only, and it was people from the Dodgers showed up, and people from the San Diego Padres and from the Chargers, and our older son played football at Alabama, and Nick Saban, connected with us 3 times and sent flowers. And Jake would have enjoyed all the nice things that people said about him, and the fact they appreciated him. And the kid that thought nobody loved him was loved by so many in the community. And as we tell his story, we hope we're saving lives because we know this is what Jake would want.
So the weirdest, people would look at me, shortly thereafter I got my doctorate. Why did I do that? I had to put my mind somewhere that I couldn't stop. I had to. And so, every weekend I was studying, I was researching, I was working full-time, going to school. It was an accelerated program. But if I didn't do something like that, I would have lost my mind. What happens, as a parent, for anybody who's a parent, you think, you always worry about the worst thing, right? When your child goes, they get their driver's license, and you're worried when they leave you until they get home. They get home, you're so grateful. Every time you think in your mind as a parent what could go wrong, you stress out, you worry, and that's why we are the way we are. And our kids will tell you, "Stop! You're driving me crazy. You're on top." It's because you always worry about what could happen. Well, that happened to us. The absolutely worst thing could happened. So now, how do you survive a loss of your child? And so for me, it has been exhausting because you just put your mind, because if not, you go through the what ifs. Right. What could we have done? And I feel that we did as parents. Here, I'm in education. Dave's a sports broadcaster, as a coach. He spent a lot of time with Jake. We were family. We were there. We had health insurance. We had all the things that you could think that a child, why? Why we didn't do drugs? We weren't big drinkers. None of that. How did this possible? So that vicious record can just go over and over in your head, and unless you put it somewhere, it could drive you crazy. So for me, it's been that, and then when that happened, then it's just working and exercise, whatever it can do to keep you from sitting. It's the nights, quiet nights, that are tough. It's the silent moments that are tough. Personally, for us, we have a strong faith. So for me, it's praying, meditation. If I didn't have my faith and my family, and keeping myself busy, I don't know what I would do.
I coach baseball. I continue to. I do things for him. I'm a high school baseball coach, and the school's done a great job of remembering Jake. Jake was my first hire as my assistant coach, and as a high school coach, and not only travel ball but high school. And he was there for the first round of tryouts, and we give an award out every year in his name, and his initials are behind home plate. And nobody's allowed to wear number 25 at that school as long as I'm there. And he has a locker set up with his stuff and his jersey hanging in it every day. But I spend a lot of time just going to the field by myself, and I honestly, I cry every day. My breath is taken away, and you just don't know when it's going to happen. You could be brushing your teeth, you could be putting your shirt on. It's just your breath is taken away. You ask how you cope. I don't think I'm doing good. I'm not doing good. So I have trouble going to sleep at night. I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I think of. I'm sure for my wife it's the same thing. But it's like the alarm goes off and it feels like someone threw a bucket of ice water in your face. And it's devastating to know your child's not here. And so I find myself, I walk the house a lot at night. I sleep probably about 3 or 4 hours at the most. Literally since my son has passed, I'm in decent shape, but I'm on heart attack and stroke medicine every day. My blood pressure went through the roof. And I'm not doing well without my son. I miss him terribly. And I take so much pride in being a dad. And being the best dad I could be, to not have one of my boys has been devastating to me. And it doesn't matter that it's been almost 5 years. It feels like it happened 5 minutes ago.
I think people think, oh, they're teenagers. But it's not normal to be in your bedroom sleeping a lot. When you're facing depression and anxiety, sleeping is a way to turn off your head. It's a way to turn off the anxiety and all that. So when you're fighting that, and you tend to see your children in their bedrooms a lot, sleeping a lot, isolating from others, your child starts to change. The personality changes a bit. That's what we saw with Jacob. It was a lot more sleeping. That very vivacious child that Dave was talking about suddenly wanted to be home more. And then the anxiety when it would kick in, like fearful to be in larger crowds and such. And just that not wanting to be out and about like he normally did. And when he was out and about with his friends, still the same person. When he came home, though, it was then a shutdown. So that was different. And if I could share anything too, is that lots of times our kids, you could say no to drugs. You could say, don't do this, don't do that. What's really important is for them to understand the why, not to shame them, not to blame them, not to yell at them, but to have conversations with them to explain why and what could happen and the reality of it. 280, 6'3", huge kid. Like what? Like I'm invincible. What could that be? Also, we had health insurance, and going to the doctors. My advocacy now for mental health is that it took so long to get counseling appointments. It took a long time, and so what can we do in the area of mental health education, and to help kids to, if you don't want to go to your parents because you're afraid to go to your parents, who else can you go to? In our schools, here I work in education, in our schools, the first thing we cut back are counselors and different things like that. What can we do to make sure our children have somewhere to talk, to go to, and that I guess the biggest thing is not to blame and shame, and to always tell your child, you can come to me. If you're somewhere and you have to say you're uncomfortable with something, you as a parent say, not a problem. You call me at 2 a.m, I'll come pick you up. I am here for you no matter what, and I promise I'm not going to yell and scold you if you call me to pick you up. It has to be that way. I think we're so used to saying no and don't do that, but why? Why? I mean, it's fun. Why can't I do this? Why shouldn't I do that? To show what can happen. And I think that's why Dave and I do what we do, because we were there, we were involved parents, but did what we did, and also never to take anything that's not prescribed by a doctor. People will tell you that's fine, or they may have it in a pill, that thing that it came from another parent's medicine cabinet. But it doesn't have your name on it. You don't know what's in that. We found out after the investigation, because we went all the way, and the person who sold Jacob that pill is in jail for the next 12 years in federal jail, that it was made in Mexico, and it was made in, was coming over in barrels, made in not a laboratory, but in garages. And they're not pharmacists, so that spec, as we were talking about, they don't know the chemical imbalance of what they just produced. So that is that's what's happening, and it's coming across, and it makes its way on social media, and it's very easy to get, and you're thinking you're taking one thing and they're selling you another. And that's what happened to Jacob, and that's what's made it so tough.
I would say this is so we always thought we had very good communication with our boys, and not only just our boys, their friends as well. Much better than I had, growing up, and I'm sure even the wave of communication my wife had growing up, and we both came from great families. But she has dedicated her life to children being in education. I think a lot of people are surprised. Go, how did that happen to that family? Well, it did. And the thing I would recommend to parents is assume everything has fentanyl in it. And it's not just, hey, I'm, going to smoke marijuana, I'm going to do this. The stuff that you always heard when we were growing up, it's everything has fentanyl in it. You got to believe it. And I understand kids believe that bad stuff's not going to happen to me. And that's just the way it is for children. The other thing is the Narcan that's out that people are taking. You cannot save yourself. And people think, well, I can do it because I have this can. You cannot save yourself. And that needs to be put out there. You can help a friend, but if it starts affecting you, it's too late. And the third thing, which I love this law is, and I remember when I was young, if there was an issue, people would go, do we call the police? Because you think, well, if we call the police, then I'm going to jail too. And here's the law. If you call the police, it happens to you, one of your friends, a family member, and they're too deep in, you can call the police and you will not be prosecuted. And it's very important to know, if you see someone who's having a bad reaction, if you don't know it's fentanyl or if you knew it's fentanyl, call the police, call 911. Don't sit there and let a family member or friend die right in front of your face. But it's very important that I think people understand the law, that you will not be prosecuted for helping somebody out, even though you might be doing the wrong thing.
Jacob had an IEP. He struggled. He was receiving resource services because he had a visual ADHD and a visual perception, which is similar to dyslexia plus ADHD. So that was a struggle. Even though he was had a lot of friends, he was very athletic, he had all of that, he struggled in school. He didn't like it. It was tough. And when we tie grades to things that you enjoy, so when he couldn't play because of grades, what did you think happened? The one thing that brought him to school, he couldn't. So we have to look at things differently and the way that we can do things, because our kids may come to school because of art. They may come to school because of dance. They may come to school because they love to interview. They love communications. That's their thing. And so we have to look at things differently, because taking a passion away and then all you have is what you struggle with makes it tough. And that's what happened with him. He had a couple incidents happen at school that was hard on him, and then to take that away from him too was tough. And that's where we saw the beginning of the depression, and that is when that was taken from him. We've worked with the prosecutors in the DA's office going through this whole investigation, and it was 3 years worth of an investigation because we had COVID. So even though the person was caught, nothing could happen because no one was going to court. So, so we've been working with them, and they would come to our house and they do investigations, and a lot of different, because this happened, many avenues of investigations happened because they started uncovering a lot. So with that, we started getting to meet different investigators and different people, and they would come to us. And then after the person was prosecuted, they asked us to start speaking. And so when we would speak on the news or different places, Dave spoke at
San Diego State, and I'd love to get into as many schools as possible. We were just speaking about it the other day, but I would love to spend my days, if I could get into a middle school a day, a high school a day, I would spend the rest of my time talking to students. And I understand when I was younger, people would come to talk. Well, we've actually lived it. I'm not here to scare you. I just want to be able to share, the story. Give me 10 minutes. I understand kids' attention span's not great, but it's one of those things. I would like to share the message the best we can. I know that's what Jake would want. That's what Jake was trying to do through suicide prevention talks.
So I think it was through that So every time the DEA's office would call and ask us to speak, we would speak. And so the last one he did was for the sororities and fraternities at San Diego State, and then we just did one at Fentanyl Awareness Day, which was a couple weeks ago up in Carlsbad, and anytime that we can. And so we were surprised, but they gave that award to our family, David, myself, and our oldest son, Joshua. And so that's how we got the award.